when there's enough people.
Hello folks, welcome to the webinar, fifth in the series. We're just going to hang around for a few minutes until everyone's got here and then we'll crack on. Hello folks who just joined us. We're just getting ready for this next in the series of webinars on our process of developing a natural capital plan for Eastern England. So just sit tight, and when we've got decent quorum, we'll crack on. Hello Chris, how you doing? So we're back on the webinar function again. So there's chats and questions, and you can ping stuff at us as you go. As usual, I've got a bit of me ruffling on, updating about what we were doing, but then we're going to take questions as they come. I think so far we haven't had a single session that's had less than about 20 something questions. So I've left plenty of time for that because that's obviously critical. We're also recording, so this will be available online. Yeah, you all know the drill.
At the end as well, we're also going to ping out the survey. If you can take some time to fill that out, takes a few minutes, just so we can track the process or the progress of people's understanding of the SCP process.
As an entirely unrelated to anything note, whilst we're waiting for people to turn up, I watched some of the other early webinars the other day and realised it's become slightly a testament to the growth of my lockdown beard. As you can see it getting longer from session to session.
We won't recognise you when you come to shave it off again, Sam.
No, exactly. Who's this child? Right, what are we at time-wise? Jolly good, we'll give it a couple more minutes. So, welcome to those of you who just joined us. We're just gathering for this webinar on, which is the next in the series, on developing a natural capital plan for Eastern England. Today's one's going to be about how we're going to set targets. We're going to give you kind of an overview of the approach you're going to take, basically. We're starting to reach what I suspect will be quorum. So we will crack on in just a second. Cool, I think I'll do nicely. So, just as a quick reminder, I'm Sam Sinclair, one of the directors of Biodiversify. We've got Robin Price on the line as well, who's going to be here to ask questions in whatever form they come at the end of it. We're now in the targets section of the process. So yeah, I'm going to talk you through what that means in a bit more detail. Or at least I will, if this will respond to my clicks. So first off, yet again, thank you for your input. We're still getting submissions coming in. They're still extremely welcome. We're getting such a wide selections of inputs from different types of organisations. It's really fantastic. It's really nice to have NGOs and county councils and private sector organisations and all kinds of different people submitting and genuinely contributing to this process. We also get a lot of emails and questions. My phone number, stupidly, is still on, or not stupidly, but rather ambitiously perhaps, is still on the bottom of everything. So please do just give me a ring or send an email. I got a phone call from a farmer the other day interested in, well, his interest was in having more wetlands in the area, which was fantastic to hear. And it's actually really useful to hear people's kind of unique takes on things. It helps contextualize it all. As always, if in doubt, submit something. You can always update your input later. Much rather have your voice and your hat thrown into the ring. So, the question we're going to be talking about today really is, what are targets? So targets in this context are a quantified description of your actions and objectives. So it's literally just there to describe your submissions. I know that targets often have a lot of kind of quite heavy weighted meanings about things you have to achieve and deadlines and that kind of stuff. But in this context, that's not really what they are. They're just a way of trying to quantify, you know, when you say you want more wetland, roughly how much more? You know, what's the kind of, what scale are we talking about here? The other thing that's really key to note here is these are not set in stone. It's absolutely an adjustable thing. And when we send out the first version of the plan, and your feedback will be used to tinker with that. It's very easy for us to change the numbers and rerun the analysis to suit what people say and adapt it to different types of feedback as well. And I think this is also an important thing to note, is that this will be a lot easier once you've seen a map. I want to talk about it now so that it's we get your feedback and your guidance on this. But I find this a little bit challenging in some ways. I mean, so for example, I'm from Brighton in East Sussex. And if you told me how much more woodland would you like in East Sussex, honestly, I would have no idea. You know, if you said we had a 100-hectare target or a 1,000-hectare target, I wouldn't really know what that would mean for the downs and you know the woods that I used to walk in. Whereas if you showed me a map of where you were going to plant trees and expand woodland area, that I could definitely get my head around. And I kind of suspect I'm not alone in this. So what we're going to be doing at this stage is more getting people sort of general guidance and steer of what they want. And then when the map comes out, I suspect a lot of people have a bit of a kind of, oh, right, this is what this means moment. And then we can kind of get into the nitty-gritty what people like or don't like about it. And the other thing to note here is that targets really are about indicating what it is you want to achieve in a useful way. So this means, for example, if you really love forests, just setting a massively high target for trees probably isn't very helpful, because all that will do is kind of give you this very diluted tree zone across all of Eastern England, when actually identifying kind of priority areas for action is going to be much more useful. So how do we set them? Well, first off, there is an ecological basis which sets the potential ranges of the targets. So, you know, even if you love the fens, there is a limit to how much fenland one can create across Eastern England. And that's determined largely by the ecology of it. So fortunately, Natural England have really good data, which provides us evidence base. They've got great maps which lay out where there are existing habitats, degraded habitats, and the potential for establishing new habitat areas. And we can combine these things to understand what the potential is, what the kind of state of the landscape is, and what the potential is for the landscape. And there has been an enormous amount of work undertaken by Julia and CISO. I have to confess, as a social scientist, I have done exactly none of this, to collate all this evidence into a single database and prepare it for spatial prioritization analysis. And they've been working on it since, well, since about June, I think, and Julia since September. So this represents an enormous body of work. And just to give you a kind of little glimpse into what this sort of stuff looks like, this is the map of potential areas for habitat creation across Eastern England. Now you can kind of see it on the left, but at this scale it's difficult to actually make it out. But this zoomed in bit can show you what that's the whole area. So it gets pretty specific about where there are potential areas for creating different types of habitats. And this is a composite of many, many, many different data layers put together. And some of the eagle-eyed amongst you would have noticed that in many cases there are overlaps which have the potential to be developed into multiple different types of habitat. And that's kind of the exact reason why I think SCP is going to be strong in this context, because the analysis will help you figure out where across this area you should focus different actions. And you should basically move these puzzle pieces around in order to get the outcome you want. And like I know, this is the map for potential areas for habitat creation, but actually they've developed similar maps for restore, for manage, and conserve as well. Now, that's the map of the lot of it, but of course this is also broken down by each habitat. So just picking out one example here, lowland fen. Under conserve, you've got the current state of the good condition habitat, which is about 89 kilometers squared. So that's how much you can just protect and keep thriving. There's restore, this is areas which are degraded and therefore have the potential for restoring back into a higher quality. There's 100 kilometers squared of that. But then establish, so this is where you would take areas that are currently not any form of lowland fen, but create lowland fen habitat there. The potential for that is 1,460 square kilometers, which is obviously pretty massive. Now, this information is really helpful contextualizing what the target should or shouldn't be. For conserve and restore, you'd probably want to set high targets, but probably not 100. And the reason for that is that all of the areas where you might wish to where you could restore backwards, some of these areas, for example, might be isolated or fragmented, or in places where actually it's not that useful to have lowland fens. Actually, the same amount of effort would be better off spent in establishing new areas in the right places. But so this gives us our sort of like evidence base to start off with. The other thing, of course, that's really critical about setting targets is it's about what you want. Because what these targets really trying to do is represent your shared vision for the landscape. So your input is absolutely critical to this. I'm just going to make sure that I'm connected to the right Wi-Fi in case as I'm apparently cutting in and out. Yeah, okay. Give me 1 second. For some reason it didn't connect automatically. Okie dokie. So I should be now on my better Wi-Fi, which means you should be able to see me more seamlessly. Okay, so your input is really critical to setting the targets. Obviously, this is about what it is you want from your landscape. So the ecology is a useful place to start, but that's not going to dictate anything. This should be based upon what you collectively say. So for starters, we can use the submissions you've already sent in to set provisional targets. We're going to be seeking more guidance from you on this shortly, but I'll talk about this in a second. So as an illustration of this, here are the objectives you sent in terms of the groups in terms of natural capital categories. So the most frequently identified category was around habitats, which is really nice because that's actually really sensible. Obviously, it's much easier to plan for habitats than anything else, and it's going to be much more effective. So it's really encouraging to see that actually we've got the steer to base targets around habitats. There's also a high desire for water in terms of water purification, flood prevention, climate regulation, and water quality. So this gives us another really useful steer. This suggests that actually the habitats which provide these services are ones that are of particular importance because these things particularly people care about. We also got some stuff in there about connectivity, and this is really critical. I just wanted to bring this up because this is something we wouldn't set a target for, but it's something that's actually dealt with inherently in the SCP analysis. We'll talk about that more at a later webinar. So the other way in which we can use your input is in the specific words you've used, the things you brought up, the phrases you've identified. So 4 habitats were identified more frequently than all the others by a considerable margin. And there's a chalk grasslands, lowland fens, acid grasslands, and reed beds. Now what this tells us is that probably because there is a higher interest in these habitats, the targets for these habitats should be a bit higher than some of the other ones because they're generally speaking of more importance to the stakeholders. But then the other thing is people mentioned ecosystem services they're particularly keen on. Like I said, carbon and water related largely. Now, this to me suggests that we should also put a bit of a focus on the habitats that provide those services, which is broadly speaking woodlands, wetlands, and peatlands. Those are the ones that particularly provide those services. It's also important to build on the vast wealth of effort already put in before us, and here I'm going to talk about the priority habitats. So these are the ones identified by Natural England, GNCC. And there's a wealth of evidence as to why this list of habitats has been identified as particularly important for their significance to biodiversity. And quite a few people just said that. Said, we'd like the priority habitats included. So that's another important thing to consider, that actually these habitats should be in some way focused on. So that's the objectives. The other thing, of course, we asked you about was actions. So what should the focus of actions be? So we broke the actions down into the same categories, the natural capital categories, as you may remember from the last webinar. And again, biodiversity came out as really important here, high and above the others, which is exactly as it should be for natural capital plan. Our actions should be focused around biodiversity. So that's encouraging. But then the other 4 areas that came up were water quality and supply, flood control, and climate regulation. So what this tells us is that you've asked us to emphasize actions which deliver water and carbon benefits through biodiversity. So there's a lot of emphasis on biodiversity for biodiversity's sake, but also for these 4 key benefits. So what types or zones do we want? So you may also remember this table from last time, which is where we split all the actions into these 4 zones: establish new habitat, restore existing habitat, manage productive landscapes such as farmland in a biodiversity friendly fashion, and conserve existing habitat. Now, by far and away the clearest message was that the majority of actions were actually around establishing new habitat. There were more actions related to establishing new habitat than there were all the rest put together. Now, this is not a given. This is not a normal state of affairs or a kind of completely standard thing. This is actually a really important steer from you. And this actually reflects what's happening elsewhere in the region. Very famously, rather, Cambridgeshire and the LNP there have a doubling nature ambition for the county. So that, to me, is very clearly a focus on establishing new sites. That is about creating new areas for nature. So it's actually really encouraging from across the entire W area actually reflects what we're being told by the LNP in Cambridgeshire. It really kind of strengthens that actually this is not an isolated thing. This is something that there is consistency across in terms of the ambition. And just to highlight this, if we were doing this same sort of plan, the same sort of exercise in Northern Scotland, we probably would have a very, very different set of feedbacks. The stakeholders there will probably say, well, actually, we've got plenty of habitat. We've got all the habitat we need. And they probably wouldn't mention establishing new habitat. It probably wouldn't be relevant. So for them, you might have a lot of conserve, a bit of restore, and a little bit of manage. And actually, established might not even be used at all as a zone. So it really does reflect that actually this is a unique circumstance, unique to East of England. And that therefore is something we need to respect and consider when setting the targets. And so these will be the zones that will come out in the final map. You'll have these 4 zones identified, identifying priorities across the area. So, like I said, we want your voice to be clearly guiding us when we set these targets. And to achieve this, we would like to ask you 2 key questions. Now, I'm not going to ask them right now, although thoughts would be lovely. I'm going to be putting together a questionnaire which I'll send out. The first question is, are there important habitats? So are there some that are of particular importance, or should all habitats be dealt with equally? So you might have a target, for example, of just achieving 10% increase across all habitats, and it's the same regardless. Or you might say actually wetland and peatland are particularly important. So we'd like the target for wetland and peatland to be 20% and everything else to be 10. So question 1 is, are there important habitats, or should they be dealt with equally? And if there are important habitats, which are they? So far, the feedback we've had, the guidance we've had, has really been pretty clear that actually there are important habitats. wetland habitats are particularly important for a range of things, both in terms of biodiversity, but also cultural heritage. This is part of the history of the area. And if that is the case, then fantastic. That's really useful to know, and we'll reflect that in the targets. And in particular, we would probably turn the establish and restore targets up higher for those particular habitats. The second question is, how ambitious should the targets be? Now, sort of the obvious answer might feel like as ambitious as possible, but it's actually a bit more complex than that. So the level of ambition affects a proportion of the water resources east area identified as a priority. So if you have lower targets, this will mean there are fewer priority areas identified, which makes those really critical places for action. It'll really go, these are absolutely essential areas where these actions should take place, and it'll kind of really raise their profile. Alternatively, if we had a more ambitious set of targets, so higher targets, this would identify a larger area of the Water Resource East district region as a priority. Now this dilutes it a bit. It means they're not quite such essential priorities. They are still priorities, but they're not quite as critical. But then it does mean you're then including more land managers, more actors, more projects, and you've got a kind of wider reach with that. And that, I think that's also a very important thing to consider. Allowing more people to engage and involve with this is a very important thing. So, and this really is about taste, not about what people want, and about what people think will be most effective in translating to action. So there isn't really a right answer to this question. This is about what you want, really, at the end of the day, and what you think will be most effective in actually delivering stuff tangibly on the ground, which, of course, is the whole point of all this. So we're going to put this question to you in a questionnaire and get your feedback, basically, and use that to sort of set the ambition of the plan. Again, and I'm going to be a total broken record on this, but these are not binding answers. People can send us their thoughts. I will seek their feedback, and we'll go based on that guidance. But when the plan comes out, this can all be adjusted. This can be adjusted extremely easily if people think, oh gosh, no, that's nowhere near enough targets, or actually the wetland you've identified is really unambitious. That should go up way higher. This is incredibly easy stuff to adjust once we've had your feedback. And like I said, I think it'll be a lot easier to give specific feedback on this once you've actually seen a map. So we're going to use an online questionnaire to get your opinion on these questions. There'll be details in there that explains this more kind of precisely what I'm saying and what we'd want from you and how we use it. This will be shared over the next couple of weeks. I'm hoping early next week that'll come out. We'll contact you via email. There'll be a link. The link will go up on the WRE website. We will make this as widely available as humanly possible. We will also keep it short and simple. I'm very, very appreciative to the large numbers of people who are turning up every month to these webinars, and I'm really grateful to you for listening and sticking with this. So I want to make sure this isn't a burden. This is something you could fill out very quickly and easily. You also don't have to have submitted objectives and actions in order to fill it out, but you should anyway. You should, if you're filling out this form, you can fill out the other form. It's very quick. So more feedback, the more feedback the better, really, regardless of your engagement up to this date in the process. And these results will be used directly to set the targets for the first iteration of the plan. And we will talk about the results of this at the next webinar on the 2nd of March. We will feed back to you what you've said and how we're going to use this to set the targets in the prioritization. So that's the main bulk of the update for the day. I think now we'll move on to questions. I will focus through them. It's been a fairly brief one today because in many respects we're just processing the data you sent us already. And yeah, getting your steer on how you'd like targets. So send over questions and I will answer them as they come in. And Robin, if you wish to pitch in on any of this, then please do. Hi, Robin. How you doing?
How are you? There are a couple of questions come in. Really pertinent one from Chris Bowden around is there an assumption that the target should be linked to local nature recovery strategies? So how do LNRSs feed into this, please?
Yes. So this is a really interesting question. So part of the reason I'm pausing is I have to make sure I don't say anything I shouldn't. So as you may well know, Biodiversify is supporting DEFRA and Natural England by working on the LNRS pilots. So we're working very closely with them to use systematic conservation planning in support of these pilots. That's public record, so I can definitely say that. I think they absolutely should be linked to the LNRSs. And I will be saying that. I think it's actually a really this is really talking about how do you link regional plans to a local plan, so at a county level. And I think there are a few different ways this can work. Probably my favourite would be there'll be identified parishes within the counties that are particularly important areas for different types of action. And actually, although this won't be necessarily conveyed in the original, in the plan that comes out, there will be numbers behind that. The reason we don't normally share the numbers is in isolation, they're not always that helpful. But if you're working with a team who's really getting engaged and developing an LNRS, actually those numbers can be extremely helpful because it can identify specific areas for types of action and actual quantities, hectares or kilometers squared or whatever it might be. Now, the key thing here is that this is just about providing another input to the LNRSs. Of course, the LNRSs are about a county and the stakeholders within a county figuring out what they want from nature in their area. The guidance that we provided by something like this is an indication of which bits are particularly important. So where could extra action, for example, in Cambridgeshire, which I know is Chris's particular interest, benefit the whole of Eastern England? And that's particularly pertinent to Cambridgeshire because, of course, you're upstream of most of Eastern England, which means that things like fenland and wetland and all that kind of water management stuff is going to have a large knock-on effect on other people. So that kind of guidance is, to me, another input that would be extremely helpful within an LNRS. But at the same time, it wouldn't remove any of the agency. It shouldn't dictate anything. At the end of the day, this is all about trying to kind of coordinate and collaborate and link up. So this is a very, I would suggest, soft form of input. It's specific and detailed, but at the same time, it's about empowering counties and actors within these areas.
Brilliant, thank you. A couple of questions from Ken Otter, but I think Ken, you found some of the answers on the on the website. But yeah, just in terms of sample map, how accessible is that, etc. To everybody now. Yeah, people are very keen not to duplicate work, Sam. So it's not really there. So how do people avoid that? And anything else you could point to a newbie? Welcome, Ken. A newbie like to the website. Anything particularly you kind of recommend to that Ken reads first on what is a growing amount of information on the SCP bit of our website?
Absolutely. I work through the webinars with a cup of coffee, and yeah, that'll tell you most of it. So one thing I would say is don't worry about duplication. Duplication is actually really helpful. If you can look at this and go, actually, you know what, I really care about wetlands and fenlands, even though other people have said that, that's really helpful because that makes us aware that there are multiple people who care about these things. It's not about trying to get, can we together think about all the things we want from nature? It's about what do you want? Tell us what you want, and then we will compile that with everything else everyone else has said they want, so that we get a vision for this that represents the shared vision for everybody. And like I said, this is particularly important for targets. Wetlands and fenlands and that kind of thing has come out as really, really highly important. So if you repeated that, that actually gives us really important guidance.
Brilliant. I'm going to just nip into the chat. John Ballum has put a question, Sam, which I think is really helpful. Could you just run through the difference between manage and conserve, please? And whilst you're there, may as well talk about establish and restore as well. So just real brief, Sam, your definition of those four. I know they're elsewhere, but just for the purposes of the audience today.
Absolutely. So in really simple terms, establish is establishing new areas of biodiversity and habitat. So taking an area that's currently under farmland, for example, under agricultural use and converting it into habitat. Restore is taking areas where there are degraded or fragmented areas of habitat and either connecting them or bringing them back to a good quality. Conserve is taking areas that are already good quality, but maybe aren't protected because they're not part of a designated site, and making sure that they retain there and they're not lost through, one reason or another. And then manage is about managing areas that are part of the productive landscape, so under agricultural use, for example, in a biodiversity and nature-friendly way.
Wonderful, thank you.
And also of mild relevance, these directly link to the tiers that are coming out of Elm. Loosely speaking, establish and manage will be directly the sort of thing that gets funded by Elm, and that's intentional in terms of our design.
So establish and manage will be the
Okay. I mean, I imagine restore is also a possibility, but those will be the big ones, really, I suspect.
That's good. Yeah, really helpful to have that clear. Thanks, Sam. Question from Alan Woods. So you shared conserve, restore, establish spatial targets for lowland fens as an example. Do you have the same for all of the areas? Have you got all of that? If so, can you make that table for all habitat types available to the group, and it would help inform thinking about how much more is needed? Great question.
Yes, we do. I've been sent that by my planning team on Friday in common delineated form, so it's not looking very pretty, but that is something we are going to put together. And yeah, I was a bit hesitant about it because I wasn't sure how whether that might be confusing, but actually if you think it would be useful, then I'm sure that's something we could share. And I think probably that's something we'd put on the questionnaire, because we want to try and give people the context for these decisions. And that's actually particularly important because there are some areas where there's like a tiny fragment of a habitat, which means even though no one's mentioned it, the fact that it's so rare means actually we should set conserve at 100%, just because it's we could lose it otherwise.
Brilliant, thank you. Question from Andrew Alston. So will the strategy be to connect the floodplain to rivers in Broadland? The term is impeded connectivity.
So we do have data on where floodplains can be connected to rivers, although weirdly it seems to be absent for areas of WRE. And we're currently looking into that to figure out whether that is because there are no opportunities, which seems very unlikely, or whether actually this is a data gap. So essentially, if we have spatial data for it, we can set a target to it and plan for it. So for example, connecting floodplains. If we don't, we can't. So when we get to the bottom of that, I'll let you know, basically.
Well, thank you. A question from staying in the Broads for Andrea. Hi, Andrea. Just a bit of moment of detail might be answered by seeing the method. So the map clip you showed of the Broads area showed fen creation in areas that Andrea was not expecting on behalf of the Broads Authority. The national fen creation targets used to be low compared to rebed due to soils and other environmental constraints. Are you able to just maybe not answer in detail, but just the point? So,
no, this is great, actually. This is super helpful, Andrea. And please don't think this is something you should be taken offline. This is totally what this space is for, talking about this kind of detail. Because if you're thinking about that about fens, then someone else is thinking that about woodlands and about all the other habitats. And this is actually the strength of this, is that we will share these data layers when we share the first version of the analysis. And the analysis will identify where there are priorities based on these data layers. But we know they're not perfect. We know that they're going to have mistakes in them. We know they're going to be, these are nationally available data sets, so they're not as tailored and as well ground truth perhaps as local data sets in some cases. So what we will rely on is people like you looking at the map when it comes out and going, oh crikey, that is not a good place for fen creation. That absolutely shouldn't be in there. What a mistake. You've messed up, Sam. Amazing, fantastic. If we send it in and you go, actually you can mark literally, draw lines on a map and send us an angry email about it going, this is completely wrong here and here. Fantastic. We will take that data. We will either identify where there's a systemic issue, so either perhaps there is a data layer that is consistently incorrect in a certain way, or it might be a local issue in that it's generally correct, but when it gets to your area of the world, for example, there are some mistakes, and we can deal with those in different ways, so that then when we rerun the analysis, it includes your feedback, and it therefore makes it better. And that's partly why there may well be multiple, there are going to be multiple iterations required so that people have a chance to really think all these things through.
Brilliant. Now, Neil Punchard's also from the Port Authority, has put his good glasses on and suspects it might have been Heath. So again, just something on the maps. Are you able to use some more contrasting colours, Sam? Are there options to kind of play with the colours so people don't put their best glasses on to see the difference?
Yes, and this actually was something that Julia raised. She said, and I quote, "Sam, the established map is a mess because they all overlap. Are you sure you want me to send this to you?" And I said yes, because I felt it was the most, it conveyed some important points. So that's something that Julia's produced as an output, as a byproduct of something she's producing. So that's kind of more reflecting the data that she has. So yeah, when we share this with you, it's all going to be in a much more visually designed and understandable format. We want to basically, I wanted to show off what Julia had done because it's cool and it's I think really impressive.
Yeah, it is. It is cool, and a good point from Henry around making sure this is accessible to anyone with color blindness or any other form of impairment. So it's good. Yeah, we need to make
That's a good point. Yeah,
ability
okay.
in some way. So yeah, thanks Henry.
Thank you. Yeah.
So just to point back up to from Alan around, builds on Andrew's point, setting targets, we also need to specify necessary preconditions. So an example, you can't recreate a lowland fen with a diverse plant community without also drastically reducing phosphate levels in rivers, as most of the sensitive species will simply not survive with current P levels. So really good play off between water resources, land restoration, biodiversity, water quality, etc. So what say you, Dr. Sinclair?
Yeah, so this is a really important point, and this kind of comes into the implementation aspect of this, because what you're talking about here is partly the extra effort that would have to go into making an area suitable for that restoration. And obviously, as you all know, we're using a cost layer to represent the relative cost, and by that we mean kind of both opportunity cost, but also the difficulty of undertaking these projects here. And actually, if what you help us do with your feedback is identify that in certain areas the cost of things like recreating lowland fens are much higher than you might expect because of the other things you've got to orchestrate with regards to phosphate levels in that area, then that's actually really useful information. So that there are different ways we could deal with that. Again, it could be that we get data on the relative phosphate levels in different places, and then we represent that in the costs for that. Represent the costs. Or my plans might tell me that's not what they want to do, and it might be that we actually identify areas and just raise the cost for those different things. Or we lock out areas for further restoration because you go, theoretically it works, but because of this quirk with phosphate that you might not be aware of or that we might have data for, these areas are never going to be good opportunities for this. So there's a few different ways we can tackle that. I think my gut would be when we produce this, if we make those kinds of mistakes, you, as ever, draw a line around it on a map, give us a comment, send us in, and we can go through and refine it.
Brilliant, thank you. Got a comment from Andrew around paying more attention to beds as an intervention to how would Andrew put that in? I don't know if Andrew's Andrew, whether you've had a chance to feed any objectives into Sam yet, but how would Andrew kind of feed that into this process, a specific reed beds as an intervention?
So this particular comment is a really interesting one because it contains two things Andrew wants. He wants more reed beds, but he wants them specifically to clean up water quality. So I would say you should send in a thing saying objective 1, you want more water quality, and objective 2, you want more reed beds. But also, interestingly, you're talking about reed beds here for a purpose. So in this particular instance, reed beds is both an objective and an action, which is completely fine. You can have it as both. There's no reason why not. And actually, if you sent us in something in there saying this, you'll notice in the on the spreadsheet where we have objectives, there's a little column which says, are there implied actions? And we've highlighted where people have said things like this. Because what this does is we then go away and we look up, try and find the evidence that connects reed bed to water quality at a landscape level. And then wherever possible, we then include that directly in the analysis.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, really important question from Alex Plant around, yeah, thinking more broadly. So the issues of security of supply and water are certainly becoming more acute, particularly as a result of the increase in per capita consumption, the amount of water we're all using triggered by COVID and home working. How do we make sure that this, well, no, can we ensure that this particular dynamic is captured within this work as well? So where does that fit in?
So I think this would land firmly in the other parts of the WRE project. There's obviously, let's not forget that whilst this is very exciting, this is a smaller part of a larger project, and actually there's a lot of work going on water resource management across Eastern England, into which this will all feed. But the last thing we want to do is try and deal with problems that are best dealt with in those processes. So I think that one would be a problem for Robin and Steve, most likely.
No, I would agree, absolutely. We need to marry this together. Yeah, you're giving us our environmental destination, aren't you, through this?
Exactly.
Environmental ambitions through this process. Okay, brilliant. Tammy Smalley off of Lincolnshire is with us. So hi both. How can we link this to the natural capital we're developing as part of the ELMS test in South Lincolnshire, South Links Water Partnership? Yeah, so stakeholder consultation, fatigue management, that test is focused on water. So how do we join this into the partnership? I know another area you're becoming increasingly familiar with, Sam.
Indeed. Having all kinds of conversations about South Lincolnshire at the moment. So Tammy, I guess there's a few components to this. Firstly, from my understanding, having read through the proposal, is that, or something around this anyway, is that you're focusing largely on stakeholder engagement with farmers at the moment. And I don't see this as directly being having a farmer engagement activity within it at the moment. I think there will be a role for that later on. And I think that will have to be done sensitively and guided by those who know better than us about how to engage farming communities. So my strong suspicion is we do that in either close collaboration with or led by NFU, CLA and organisations like that. So I don't think this will cause fatigue with the stakeholders that you're thinking about in terms of that aspect. In terms of the other parts of this, my strong hope would be that this map would be the sort of thing that would guide ELMS. So actually you could use this as the sort of indication as which areas might be particularly useful for tiers 2 and potentially I guess 3 of the proposed ELM paradigm. So that would be a nice connection there. I think this is probably a conversation to carry on as it's project specific. This is maybe something we can have a chat about later.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay. If anybody wants to put any final questions up, we're okay for time, but no need to carry on to 3 if we don't need to. Sam, just taking us back a webinar. Obviously, we've had a fantastic submission of heading on for 500 different objectives and everything. We're heading on for 50 different organisations. Are you ready for your next 500 yet? How are the team? Are you? Ready for more now? Because obviously you're processing a big batch, and we've kind of seen some of the outputs, and I know Nancy and a number of us have been just encouraging other organisations to still, just to go back that stage and continue to submit objectives in. Are you ready? Are you ready yet?
Yeah, so at the moment, we have quite a lot more submissions that we've received. We've processed, like you said, over 900 now, well over 900. But we have a lot more yet that we haven't processed. And that's because we're going to process them after we release the first version of the map, the plan. Basically, Julia and CISO are working flat out because what they've got to do is for every single one of these, they've got to go and find a data layer that links to that objective and that action. And they've got to make sure that it's twinned properly and properly represented. And this proposed approach to speaking to you about targets has come out of some pretty extensive conversations internally at Biodiversify, because what we wanted was the most effective way of getting feedback from you en masse in a way that's not onerous on you. And the last thing I want to do is send you a massive long list of all the features and go, what should the targets be? Rather, I want to get a gauge of what it is you want. And that's why one of the questions is a bit about habitats and the other one's it's almost more about the practicalities of it really than necessarily the habitats themselves, so that they can then use that guidance in an efficient way, basically, that's not going to take a huge amount of time to process, but allows them to kind of tweak the analysis and the targets so that it suits what they want. Please do keep sending them in though, because basically what will happen is we'll send the map out, the first version will come out, and then in the brief lull, they will then process all of the objectives and actions that have been submitted before they then get on to the massive pile of feedback they then get from WikiVlog.
Brilliant. And Sam, so last time we spoke, you were on about 480, now up at 900. Is there anything you can share? Is this narrative still the same, that kind of biodiversity sits right at the top, then water quality, and then establishment and restoration are the two zones that are the key ones? There's nothing that story is being reinforced, is it, rather than being changed in any way?
It is. It's very consistent, and the thing that I'm most happy about with this is that it chimes with what we're hearing from everywhere else. When you look at the priorities in the Norfolk and Suffolk Natural Capital Evidence Compendium, there's a lot of parallels with this. When you look at what Chris Bowden and the LNP and those lot are talking about for Dublin, Cambridgeshire, again, they're talking about established. They're talking about a lot of the same stuff we're talking about, and that's again, that makes me very confident. If we were in a situation where we were saying very different things to certain people working in areas across the region, that would make me really nervous. But we're not. It's really kind of actually chiming together. And the thing I like about it is we're combining stuff. So the things that Cambridgeshire aren't talking about, but maybe Essex and Suffolk and Norfolk are, that's also being included in this. So it really does feel like it's kind of a combined tune, taking in something for everyone.
Brilliant. And yes, please, from Andrea about a more detailed discussion around mapping in the broad area and having
Yeah, very happy.
Broad test and trial farmer groups. Again, we've got the great test and trial that Tammy's leading, but we've also got a really great one that Andrea and colleagues are leading in the Broads as well on the test and trial. So that'd be great.
Yeah, fantastic. And I mean, SCP is just, as you know from doing the LNRSs, is just as applicable at a county level as it is at a regional level. So if we can find a way to support you with that, one way or the other.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Okay. Are there any final questions before we give everybody 15 minutes before people are back to back with their 3 o'clock?
Yeah, I considered talking a bit more about the details of the analysis, but I kind of felt it was rather better to give you an overview and then give plenty of space for questions, as we're very much developing this kind of as we go, as we talk to you based on your feedback. So the questions you ask us get logged, and often they form discussions we have internally at Biodiversify, and how to make sure we really do tailor this to what you want. So it's a bit of an unusual process, this, because we're very much not showing you some finished shiny product. We're designing this approach based on the questions you ask us and the feedback you give us and the emails and the phone calls as we go. And so I'm very happy to finish early if there are no more questions, because I would much rather have space for all the questions to come up than to miss them.
That's a great one, actually. Yeah, and Graham kind of read my mind, because I normally finish these on these. Are you receiving good input from all WRE areas? Are there any areas that you could do with more input, either from a sector base, if we cut it that way, or from a particular geography? Anything? Who are you missing?
So,
who would you love more information?
There is definitely more feedback we would like. Currently, Nancy and Rachel are going through the list and are phoning people and are calling people up and asking for input. So there are definitely people who we'd like something from. I'm a little cautious about naming names at this point.
We'll be in touch.
Yes, basically, like, we know where you live, I guess, is slightly the answer, but not so sinister way. No, my apologies. So, yes, if you listen to this and you haven't sent us something, please do. You can do it literally over a cup of tea. It's a lot of people have sent in one slide of A4 with a list of things they want, a list of actions they think that should happen, and that's it. Job done. Fantastic.
Brilliant. And a question from Alan, or a comment from Alan: reconnecting floodplains to rivers can use the EA floodplain maps to identify recreation zones?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I don't know. I'm going to have to. I will send that question on to my to Julian and CISO and see what they say.
Brilliant, thank you. Interesting point from Helen Jacobs, I guess, is from Essex and Southern Water. A lot of the actions submitted were excluded. How? So, any thoughts on that, Sam? So, do you need a different format or different format, or what's happening there?
Yeah. So what we needed are actions that are and objectives that are applicable at a regional level. So we did go through and process, well, quite a few of the actions were submitted across kind of the whole spectrum of things. There was no meanness in it. There are certain actions we can map for and plan for, and certain we can't. I mean, just to give one example, some that I thought were really important. Some were talking about making some private sector entities talking about making their fleets of cars all electric, which is fantastic and a really useful thing, but that's not something we can plan for at a landscape level. Something I do take positively is from that comment, I'm taking that you've had a look online and looked at them and checked your actual submissions. So I'm really glad you did that. That's fantastic. If you think we've done this wrong, and we might have done, then let us know. This is not a perfect process. This is something we're working with you as we go. So if a mistake has been made, please do flag it. Let's have a chat. Let's make sure that I've properly understood it, because it may also be that you've said something that we've not understood, that we've taken the wrong end of the stick, and if that's the case, that's a very easy fix.
Thank you. And good point from Alan around EA flood zones being a key layer on the base map. The water barriers have left the land, which provides an opportunity area for reconnection and habitat reconnection and habitat recreation. Yeah.
Okie dokie. Interesting. It sounds like possibly we're going to have a chat with Alan. Yeah, interesting. Okay. And this may also be something, this might actually be something that we're going to have to take up with Steve Moncaster, because this sounds like a larger question about water management and flood management that we can contribute to, but would require a wider set of experts that are present.
Wonderful. Yes, so we spotted that Tammy hasn't submitted, and we are chasing you down, Tammy. I think Nancy's on the way to Lincolnshire now. Tammy, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Enright, for your comments. We'll get that through. Just reading the question. Thank you, Hugh Summerlayton. Such great work and so good to see so much engagement, breadth, and depth. My question would be: do we think that the lean towards water and wetlands is in part due to this being WRE led? Hugh, who lives on the edge of the Waveney Valley, so is very keen to see this former inland sea return to its natural state in time, and sea level change may do that anyway. But interested not so much on breaks and sandlings and woods, all of which store carbon and add biodiversity. And Hugh, of course, is one of the founders of the Wild East movement. So yeah, very just in case you are aware.
Yes. So the social scientist in me does worry about this, that we've got a water focus because it's WRE led. And I guess there's not much I can do about that. I can try and be very conscious of it, but I feel that we're able to triangulate a lot. So people are saying they want water-related services and benefits, but that's actually something that's is in the news. There are people talking about this. There are conflicts about this, all that kind of stuff. There's also a lot of interest in restoring the fens, both from a kind of water perspective, but also from cultural and heritage perspective. So whilst that does make me a little nervous, it's not the worst thing in the world, and the fact that we can kind of triangulate a similar answer from many other different sources makes me much less nervous than I would otherwise be.
But Sam, I think what's really stood out to me with this is that the highest kind of category by far is around biodiversity. 106 of the objectives are linked to biodiversity. The next highest is water quality, but then you come to climate regulation. So water resources, and which is what we're here to do. Come on, water resources east is
yes
way down at the bottom of the list. So I think that's really interesting in terms of the regional priority. So I liked your summary around how we deliver biodiversity improvements. That seems to be the key target, is around biodiversity improvements. How do we deliver water-related interventions that deliver those biodiversity types? Because that's what people want. It isn't necessarily about more water or well, that's definitely a priority, but the biodiversity is a real key here, isn't it? Really.
You're quite right, actually. That's an extremely good point, and I guess maybe that reflects more my over amount of diligence and concern as a social scientist. Actually, you're quite correct. Biodiversity was by far and away the most important identified topic in both actions and objectives. So yeah, no, totally right.
Well, that's the biologist in me speaking, Sam. So
Jolly good.
we need some biology going on here. Thank you, if you don't mind. Brilliant. Okay, any other? Yeah, Brex. Sorry, Hugh. Yeah, I just said breaks. I knew you meant Brex. Apologies. So, and Hugh. Yeah, we talked about the Wild East map of dreams. I know we've got a meeting with you, Rachel Dyson's the Vision of Power region might look if we tie all our colours to the massive change around biodiversity. So, and Hugh's really pleased that we are starting to create with your enormous inputs. Well, you're creating it for us. So, and the real hard science behind it. So yeah, thank you, Hugh, for your enthusiasm for everything we're doing. Really appreciate it. And if hopefully you have submitted some targets, but if you haven't, then please, there's plenty of time. Great, fantastic, wonderful. That I think is a very nice way to finish. Thank you, with amazing work. Amazing work. Thank you, Sam. So
thank you very much.
Any more questions, then we will keep sending in objectives. We will see on the 2nd of March. Nancy, when will this be all uploaded on the website? When will you be doing your, I reckon 10 minutes from now, I reckon, given the speed.
Give me a chance to make a cup of tea first. I reckon about an hour, in an hour or so. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Amazing.
Fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much. So a comment from Alan. Yeah, another good session. As watery people do value all other forms of biodiversity too, of course, absolutely. So yeah, fantastic, wonderful. All right, well, we'll close now. Thank you. If anybody wants to stay on and ask Sam any questions live, please feel free to. If not, we shall close the session and we'll see you on the 2nd of March. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much, guys. Awesome. I think we can end there.
Yeah, okay, great. I'll leave it.
Thanks, Sam. Cheers, Nancy.
Bye, 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 bye.
Cheers, thank you.